is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on our website, leave us a Google review, and if you're watching via social media, get involved in the comments section. Our email address for topics is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. A podcast version of the show is available every week from all the main podcast platforms. Just search Property Matters TV. So let's take a look at the week's news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning to all our viewers and listeners. Plenty going on in the property, and especially now that we've had a change of guard, there's lots and lots of things that are being thrown out of their pram as toys. But let's see what those toys bring us.
Indeed. And the first story this week comes from the Sunday Times and Times newspaper. Where have all the cash first-time home buyers come from? If you want to get a foot on the ladder, says the Times, you'll have to compete with the beneficiaries of the bank of mum and dad who can afford to buy mortgage-free. They focus on a lady called Vanessa. She said, my jaw hit the floor when the offers started coming in. She's in the process of selling a 3-bedroom flat in Walthamstow in East London. She said, I had no idea there was so much cold hard cash sloshing around, ready and available for 20-somethings to buy their first home outright. Vanessa had to get a huge mortgage to buy her first home, which was a fixer-upper flat 5 years ago. And now she's selling it for $600,000, and almost half of her offers are from first-time buyers with at least $100,000 in the bank. Not wanting to jeopardise the sale, Vanessa has given her first name only, and she says the estate agent made it clear that cash was king, steering me to pick one of the 2 cash offers, both over the asking price. Each was funded wholly by their respective parents. It's an interesting world that we live in for first-time buyers now, isn't it, Joe? And this is happening more and more.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting scenario to think about. The truth is, Paul, that there is quite a lot of cash around, and there's cash around because of equities that are available, perhaps in parents' homes or other homes people may have invested in over the years. And so they can be released, and some funds can be given to the children or to people that want to get within the family, want to get onto the property ladder. It has 2 avenues, I suppose. One is that it gives them a chance to get onto the property ladder, and the other, of course, is that there is always the inheritance tax liability at a later stage that can be perhaps dealt with at an earlier stage, so that they've got that time, because the ruling is normally about 7 years before they can actually turn around and say, well, actually, we are now not liable for inheritance tax. So parents are and family members are beginning to sort of think, well, actually, we're going to give this to them at a later stage. We may as well give this to them at this stage so that they can get onto the property ladder. And it could be also seen as some element of joint investment, perhaps with the parents and the children, because it gives the parents a return instead of a capital return, instead of a income on the basis that they're going to go and pay rent for the kids or put money into someone else's property by renting and supporting the children that way. So there's a lot of reasons why that is there. Not everybody's able to do it, but obviously where properties are valued high enough for the release of capital, I see that work quite well.
Yes, I mean, this 7-year rule, I was going to ask you, because clearly, if you think, well, I'm not going, if I'm in my late 70s, the chances of me, who knows, it's a 50-50 bet really, isn't it, at that stage? I suppose you could argue that about any age, but likely if you're in your late 50s, the 7-year rule, you're likely to survive that. Statistically, I would suggest, and therefore you think, well, they're going to have to pay 40% on this when I die, so let's have it now. One wonders whether to try and of course all that's doing is fueling house prices even further, because the affordability is going up for first-time buyers, and therefore the prices will go up as a result of that. Do you think there's a case where the government might need to say something like, well, it's a 14-year rule or a 21-year rule?
Well, I suppose the answer to that question is we can put words in the government's mouth, really, by taking those actions. They may not want to and may not think that is the case. But like you say, house prices may increase. But to be honest with you, house prices are doomed to increase at some point anyway. I mean, if we go back, and we've discussed this before, over the last 50 years, the reverse gear has been 5 times in that for 50 years, which is, pretty nominal by comparison. And so therefore, there is an element that there is always going to be an increase in supply and demand situation that goes on. The 7-year rule is, whether you're 50 or 60 or 70, is there on the basis that it sort of takes you out of the inheritance tax, or reduces the liability of inheritance tax. So there might be an estate that's worth way more than the amount that you've just taken out. So that tax may still be there. But if it means that they can mitigate some of that by giving that to the kids now and allowing them to get onto the property ladder, then why not? And yes, of course, the government of the day could extend that to 10, 14 or 15 years before it does. But if you're 50 and they extended it to 15, 14 years anyway, it wouldn't really matter a great deal, to a large extent, that most people outlive that point. Yes, of course, we can't guarantee that. So unfortunately, some people pass much earlier due to circumstances that are beyond their control, and some that we just don't know happen. So there's no set rule of the game. But the idea is that it allows them to consider that and say, well, actually, instead of it happening at this point, can it happen now? And can the kids benefit, or the members of the family benefit from that?
She says the first full cash offer was made by a couple, 2 doctors in their 20s. The other was made from a Chinese student in their late 20s, also bidding for a property were 3 first-time buyers with £200,000 deposits and 4 others with deposits of £100,000, all of them in their late 20s or early 30s. Typically, the only buyers paying cash, i.e. without a mortgage, are buy-to-let investors and downsizers, but an increasing proportion of first-time buyers are starting out on the property ladder mortgage-free as family wealth fills the affordability gap opened up by higher mortgage rates and widens the gulf between haves and have-nots. Data from estate agency Hamptons shows first homes accounted for more than a quarter of all the cash purchases last year. That's extraordinary. First homes accounted for more than a quarter of all cash purchases last year. Between 2022 and 2023, the percentage of first homes bought without a mortgage jumped 4.4%, from 5.1 to 9.5%. In the same period, the average interest rate for a 90% 2-year fixed rate mortgage increased from 2.55 to 5.89%, according to Moneyfacts, a financial data company. This increase, combined with record private rents, has locked would-be mortgagers out of home ownership, leaving a higher proportion, the paper says, of the market to cash buyers and buyers with large deposits. In 2019, 39% of mortgaged first-time buyers had financial help from family. Last year, it was 61%, according to Savills. That's quite something, isn't it? So up from 39% 5 years ago to 61%, so almost doubled the amount of money from mum and dad coming into the equation.
Yes, I mean, look, it's clear that the housing market is still one of the major drivers for investors, or the idea of having your own home is huge, isn't it? Really, when you think that 25% over the last few years have been buying cash, irrespective of what the state of the country might be financially, or the government, or the interest rates that we've been all talking about, there is an element of appetite that people have to buy their own first home. And that could be through the bank of mum and dad, that could be through other sources, refinance, etc. That gives them the chance to purchase their property, their first home. So it's absolutely clear, we've talked about this a million times now, that the best form of investment, or one of the best form of investment that people strive for in the United Kingdom, is the investment in their home, albeit perhaps for their ownership, or perhaps for the rent to buy, or buy to let, so that they can rent it out to people. So there's a constant demand for home purchase, property purchase. And yes, okay, it's a bit of a pool where basically it starts in places like London, because the investment level comes from not just the people that live in the United Kingdom, but it also comes from people that perhaps are moving into the country, people that are coming from abroad, who bring the cash in to put their children who may be studying in the UK on the first run of the property ladder by investing into the property of the UK, and that has to be cash because they may not be in a position to take a loan or take a mortgage because they may not have the credibility or the stability in the country to say that they can go and borrow that money. So it's clear that there is always going to be a huge demand for someone to own their first home, and 25% at cash is a huge level, isn't it?
It certainly is. David Fell, lead analyst of Hamptons, says until the last couple of years, a large chunk of this money would have been invested elsewhere. But higher interest rates have pushed more parental wealth into the housing market, subsidising millennial exposure to higher mortgage rates. He says that inheritance is also playing a large role in this. When first-time buyers were typically in their mid-20s, their parents had barely reached their 50s. Nowadays, buyers are getting onto the ladder in their mid-30s, and their parents are more likely to be in their late 50s because people have been having children older, and they're from their late 50s into their early 60s. And having benefited from the house price boom of the 2000s, they're more likely to be passing this wealth on to their children. It's also suggested that equity release is playing a pivotal role in supporting first-time buyers. That said by Steve Humphreys, the Propositions Director at Mortgage Advice Bureau, which saw 1 in 5 of its equity release customers gift these funds to help relatives on the property ladder. The house price boom, coupled with low interest rates in the 2000s, also led to more people investing in property for their children instead of putting the money into savings accounts. These naughties babies are now coming of age and coming into big money. And that's exactly right, isn't it? Because they've made that money. It would have been invested in property, probably in buy-to-let, to make some more money because there was nothing in savings until a couple of years ago. And now, of course, they've taken that money and helping them to do the same thing, I guess. So let's just move on to that equity release point. So people are actually looking to take equity out of the property whilst they're still living in it and giving it to the kids. Have you got any thoughts on equity release and the relative wisdom thereof?
Yeah, so equity release has two avenues that I think people explore. One is basically refinancing and getting the best they can. So maybe they can get a fixed rate on the next 3 to 5 years, maybe longer, which may be just a little bit more in terms of interest rates. So as we know, interest rates were quite low, and sometimes they've had to refix them at maybe 2 or 3%, and they may be available at 3.5%. So another extra percent in terms of interest rate, but it means that they might have released 20, 30, 40, 100,000, depending on the value of their home. And so the balance of that is that, is the question that paying rent on a property for their children, wherever they might be, or assisting them, is actually cheaper to pay a slightly higher mortgage rate, but fixed, taking the money out and allowing them to actually buy something and then paying a mortgage as opposed to paying a rent somewhere. It's just common sense to a large extent, if that is the way it works. The other form of equity release, which seems to be very popular, is that there are equity release funds now available where ultimately you can take out pretty much as you can out of it, maximize. They then do that over a period until you pass. So there's nothing for them to give to the children when they pass, but in terms of property. But what they have done is given them the money and also enjoyed the equity themselves. So, for example, if you had a home and it was worth £500,000, and you could probably take 75% of that out, leaving 25% in there. You would take 75%. Some of that would probably turn around and say, okay, well, look, we're going to give 150,000 pounds to the kids to put a deposit down, and the other is our money that we may not have actually had to go enjoy a cruise every so often and basically, blow it and have a great time. But I've got the lifetime stay in the property until I pass. But when I pass, there is nothing for the kids to have because the company that would have given you the money would have had 25% in there in the value, and the rest of it, they would have it would have increased in price over that period. So if you've taken an equity release over 10 years, in 10 years, the house may be worth back almost to what you released it at. So that's the gamble. It's a gamble that they take. So it's like an insurance policy the equity release companies tend to take. But it means that you can get on with your life now as opposed to waiting. And then when you pass, all of a sudden, not only is there capital gains or inheritance tax or death duties and all the other things that come along, which will only eat into the same thing anyway. So sometimes it's actually good to take the equity and get on with your life. The unsure thing about that particular part is that people think, well, actually, it's not my home now. Um, and therefore I've got to leave nothing to the children. It's just about sums, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's how they work the best. And some people find that taking a whole equity relief, not only does it mean it's something that they give to their children now, past that 7-year rule, have no inheritance tax, but also have own money so that they can actually go and live and enjoy without having the worry of it. And whatever's balance is left could be probably passed on to the children again in the same sort of way. So those are the kind of equity releases that are being talked about generally. I've spoken to many people of a certain age, 50s, 60s, 70s now, who've actually taken that route because sometimes they don't have children to pass it on to. So it's just going to go to the state, or it's just going to go somewhere in the family. And some families have their own issues where basically they don't want it to go to other members of the family. They might as well go and have a champagne life and blow it up and say, well, it's my money. I've done what I had to do with it. So there's a lot of ways of dealing with it. But the two avenues are refinancing and or selling it out to an equity release company.
Jo Eccles is a lady who runs a buying agency called Accord, and she says she's been working with many parents and grandparents buying for children as young as 4 years old, would you believe? She says she bought 2 flats, excuse me, with cash in the same building in Clerkenwell, East London, for a very high-profile British actress for her 2 granddaughters. Both flats have been rented out ever since, and the girls have rental income accruing for them until the day their grandmother decides to hand over the keys. So no wonder these second steppers, such as Vanessa, who we mentioned, are finding that there are more buyers offering large sums of cash than a few years ago. In London, where buyers have deepest pockets, Hamptons reports that 1 in 3 first-time buyers is buying without a mortgage, compared to 1 in 5 in prime postcodes outside the M25. So some people are buying these properties for kids, almost like as a christening present, almost, and then accruing the rent and also the value of the property, and then handing it over when they're of a certain age to be able to deal with it.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest things that I learned in my journey as we go is what we call forward planning or succession planning. A lot of parents and a lot of people don't tend to do a lot of that because they're nervous about what could happen and what couldn't happen, and so therefore they don't do it. But someone like this high-profile actress who has done something like this has obviously been advised correctly and has invested at a very early stage and obviously covered the assets for her grandchildren to have a base, and also made sure that there is something left for her as well to deal with. So succession planning is very, very important. The problem with succession planning is about trust, Paul, and who does it for you is a huge thing. And so there's a lot of financial advisors, independent advisors that obviously will say that it's not for their interest, but of course they are interested in their income as well. And it's whether they have offered and dealt with the right product or the right way, and also guided the people the right way. It's that comfort and confidence that people must get in order to have that. I strongly recommend that they should all plan and have some sort of succession plan. It's only too late when things happen to you or something happens within your family, and then you think, well, actually now I'm lumbered with all these extra costs, which I hadn't bargained for because there was no succession planning. There was no way forward as to what they can and can't do. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to take it with us, but you can turn around and assist your family if that's the case. But nowadays, a lot of families have lots of family issues, and so subsequently they'd rather not. But of course, they realize that if they do pass, then what happens is that the will probably share it out to those people that they've probably loath to give to in the first place. So it's the lesser of the two evils. But yeah, succession planning is a good way forward.
In Knightsbridge, 45% of first homes are bought without a mortgage, would you believe? Estate agents Harrods Estates say the area is popular with wealthy parents from overseas, primarily from the Far East and the US, who are buying luxury new build flats worth between 2 and 6 million on behalf of adult children studying in London. Kensington, where 39% of first homes are bought with cash, attracts a similar clientele who are looking for flats in more traditional mansion blocks. Further out in Ealing, West London, 17% of first-time buyers are paying cash. Director of the estate agency Ben and Reeves says that the arrival of several big developments like Dickens Yard and Ealing Broadway has driven more cash purchases into the area over the last 2 or 3 years, led by a great deal of interest from city professionals and millennials since the Elizabeth line started running, and a lengthy waiting list of foreign buyers. So it's interesting to see that it's spreading not just in the centre of London, but those figures are extraordinary. 45% of first homes are bought in Knightsbridge without a mortgage, and when you consider the prices of those properties.
Yeah, well, Knightsbridge, South Kensington, and Kensington, Earls Court, all of those West London territories going towards the Mayfair area are, and of course, in between Heathrow Airport, are hugely popular because the international buyers that like those location like those for those reasons. Communication is the answer to the problem here, and communication means not just telephone communication. It means that the tube line available from central London towards Heathrow when travelling back and forward, and also into the West London, into the Mayfair area, which is very affluent, are connective and very easy to get, and that's why those particular areas are always popular. And it's obviously great news to see that a large percentage of them are being bought for cash or for reduced amount of deposit, or sorry, reduced amount of funds. But the point really is that it's connection. And those connections are very, very valuable. And of course, nightlife generally can be very good. So it's a combination of the youngsters wanting to be in those particular areas, and that drives it, especially in sort of Knightsbridge and Kensington and South Kensington area. So yeah, I'm not surprised at the level of numbers, and especially foreign interest and foreign buyers buying.
It's not all plain sailing though, Joe, because cash buyers are fussy about the location, but there's usually a tussle between the parents about where they want to live. So they favour the established safe locations, whereas their children want to live near their friends in perhaps slightly poorer parts of London, if you want to put it like that, near their friends and their favourite pubs and cafes, etc. Parents usually are the ones that advocate for larger 3-bedroom homes, so their child has the option to share costs with a friend or sibling, or they harbour hopes that their child might meet a partner and start a family. Nina Harrison from the buying agency Harrington says, this frequently leads to eye-rolling from young buyers who may not share their parents' 5-year plan, but are happy to go along with their vision just to secure the property. Nearly 1 in 4 cash first-time buyers is willing to take a fixer-upper because they're more likely than those with a mortgage to have the funds to renovate. Self-made parents are more likely to push their children towards a property project too, as they see it as an easy way to make money on their investment. They're also keen for the child to have some skin in the game as well. Some parents are very aware, though, that they're just handing their children everything on a plate, and that's the point, really, isn't it? You think, well, how hard was it when I remember my parents' first house, just struggling to pay a house at £5,500, and that was a real struggle back in the 60s. And, our first mortgages, I remember having a 15% mortgage rate. And my first payment on a £73,000 mortgage was £868 a month. So we've all had it, but here it is being handed on a plate, and they're a cash first-time buyer. There's no understanding of what these things really cost, is there, perhaps? Or is that just me being old?
No. I think putting a value and appreciating value is very, very different now than it is to the times when perhaps we and our parents had struggled to do that. But that's partly our own fault for making it too easy for them, and perhaps not letting them understand what the value is. But at the end of the day, that's the price you pay for having a family in the current times that doesn't understand and appreciate where they are at this moment in time. They're going to get it anyway, aren't they? So the reality of it is that it's just getting your mindset. And yes, of course, they will roll their eyes, and of course, they will accept it. Why not? Never look a gift horse in the mouth, basically. I mean, it might be a 5-year plan, but let's say your parents aren't around for 5 years and you decide to flog it and go and live with your friends again. But friends are not always going to be in the same place that you think they're going to be. So well versed and can guide the best to be able to say, well, look, this is where the best investment is going to be, and this is where you should look at. And in London, in all honesty, as long as you're near a tube station, what isn't close, everything is close, really. I mean, it's all within half an hour, 40 minutes of somewhere to get to, and that's not a far cry if you've been bought a property in one of the best locations, and then you've got to travel to your friends in the nearest pub. I don't think it's a huge ask. But yeah, I mean, people will make those comments, and that's called naivety from the youngsters, because that's why it's good to have the guidance of parents. I know that I would certainly have that conversation with my kids. That's for sure. I'm sure my daughter will probably say, well, actually, I want to be there because all my mates are there, and then I'd probably say, well, actually, this is where you should be because this is what's better. So it's going to be a tug of war, but I'm going to
Yeah.
win on that one. But so this.
You're the one with the wallet. That's the point.
Exactly. That's what I said. I'm gonna win on that one. So that's the way it has to be. So they can roll their eyes as much as they like, really.
Just take a moment to think about the inflationary pressure that this causes, though, because at the end of the day, if we weren't doing all of this to help them, and I appreciate why people are doing it, but all that's doing is just fueling more, exorbitant rises in house prices.
Yes, it is. But you know what isn't going to do that? And I hear what you say, but the reality is, what else is there, Paul? And this has been my beef, if you like, for 40 odd years of myself being in this business. That and I've said many times in our program that there has been nothing else that has been offered to people where they think, well, actually, I don't need to. Look, the buy to let market exploded simply because people had nothing else to invest in. Now, actually, nobody really wants to take on the burden of a leaky tap at the age of 60, 65 because someone's tap is leaking and they turn around and say, look, I can't pay my rent this week because you haven't fixed my tap. It's just ridiculous, really. But people have had to get involved in that in order to invest and get some return on their money and their hard work. Now, had there been products, safer products, as safe as houses, as we know it to be, bricks and mortar is about as safe as you can make it. If there were products that allow people to say, well, I'll take an investment in this and it's a guaranteed return of X for over that period, why would they want to get involved in such things? But people are made to go into that. And because they're made to go into that, of course, that's going to inflate the values and prices. And there are always going to be a sector that is not going to be able to keep in touch. And the first time buyers were the ones that suffered the most, because when the buy to let came out, prior to buy to let, people used to buy in names of members of family. So let's say, you've got three sons, and you would then say, well, actually, I'd buy it in Fred and Sid's and such his name individually, and I'll do that. But when buy to let came, and that also had a security and an insecurity. The security was it was within the family. The insecurity was you bought it in XYZ's name, fell out with them, and then you've done that. That's gone. Whereas now what happened was the buy to let came. People said, okay, well, actually, I can buy 5 property all in my own name. I don't need to put it in the family's name. And so they went out and bought. So if you had £100,000 in your pocket, you started to say, okay, well, I'll put £20,000 deposit on each flat. Each flat has been bought for 100,000. I'm putting 20 grand. I'm taking an £80,000 buy to let mortgage, and the rent pays for the buy to let mortgage. But that is now gone up by 150 or 200,000 pounds. Your return on investment has got better over 5 properties as opposed to one situation. And that then knocked out the first time buyer, because the first time buyer was competing with a buy to let. and the buy-to-let person had the cash, and the first-time buyer didn't have the cash. So there's never been, so that fueled the market. So there's always going to be a reason why the market's going to get fueled time and time again.
One thing's for sure, we live in fascinating times where property is concerned, and that's exactly what we'll be doing when we're back next time with another Property Matters.